When Waylon sent the message about canceling our engagement, I was standing at the hotel, finalizing the details of the setup. Evelyn's back. Engagement's off. I stared at the text, my breath halting for a second, frozen in place. The hotel manager's voice was close, but I didn't hear a word he said. Then what? My fingers trembled as I typed. Waylon replied quickly, without hesitation. She's been diagnosed with depression. She's going back to her country for treatment, can't be under any stress. I remembered the provocative message Evelyn had sent me the night before. As long as I want, you two will never get married. I thought we'd already invited both families and friends this time. I thought Waylon wouldn't go along with Evelyn's nonsense anymore. But I'd still underestimated how important Evelyn was to him. I suppressed my anger, typing quickly on my phone. When will she recover, and when can we get engaged? I didn't want to argue with Waylon about whether Evelyn was really sick. Even if I exposed Evelyn's lies. In Waylon's eyes, I'd just be making trouble. He didn't reply, and my message sank into the void. It felt like someone had poured cold water over me in the middle of winter, the chill spreading from my feet to my fingertips. He was used to avoiding our issues. To him, once I cooled down, I'd come back to him. But this time I was really tired. I had no energy to fight Evelyn for his love anymore. I had no more strength to wait for his next bout of guilt and promises. I stopped the hotel staff from setting up, paid the penalty fees, and sent Waylon a message. Let your friends and family know. The wedding's cancelled. He responded simply, okay. I gave a self-deprecating smile. Then deleted Waylon from my friends list. 7 years with Waylon, on and off. Every time, it was because of Evelyn. He loved Evelyn, but couldn't marry her. He didn't love me, but had to marry me. Waylon's mother had once said to me very plainly. She didn't mind my family's current poor state. She'd taken on the pressure and accepted the marriage because she thought I was somewhat attractive and had a childhood bond with Waylon. She hoped I could win his heart and drive away that hopeless woman by his side. I once believed that as long as I worked hard enough, as long as I stayed by Waylon's side, he would eventually change his mind. But sadly, that day never came. My love for Waylon had slowly faded, bit by bit. When I went back to the villa to pack my things, Waylon still wasn't back. He was having dinner with Evelyn at a restaurant. Evelyn's post on IG didn't show Waylon's face, but clearly captured the ring on his hand. The engagement ring we'd chosen together. I took off the ring on my finger and placed it on the dining table. After thinking for a moment, I decided there was no need to draw his attention to it. I picked up the ring and tossed it into the toilet. Just as I was about to leave with my suitcase, Waylon and Evelyn entered the door, hugging each other. Long time no see. I greeted Evelyn with a smile. Evelyn looked flustered, not knowing how to react as she glanced at Waylon. Perhaps in the past, whenever she saw me, she could provoke me with just a few words and make me hysterical like a madwoman. But now, seeing me so composed, she didn't know how to handle it. Waylon's gaze landed on the suitcase in my hand. He seemed surprised for a moment, then his expression returned to normal. Well, you should move out for a while. It'll help Evelyn recover. For him to say something so shamelessly, telling his almost fiancée to move out for his first love's recovery. It was just ridiculous. I'd been in love with such a man for 7 years. I couldn't be bothered to argue anymore. I grabbed my suitcase and left without looking back. Before I was far away, I heard Waylon say, "Don't worry about her. She'll come crawling back once her anger subsides." Evelyn pouted, "Aren't you going to comfort me? I can't bear to make you angry." I fought the nausea in my stomach and quickened my pace. I moved back into the apartment I'd bought. Downstairs was a busy shopping district. I liked lively places. Waylon liked peace and quiet. He hated my apartment. He hated my neighbor even more, Atlas. Atlas was from a wealthy family, just like him, a second-generation rich kid. Waylon despised Atlas. Probably because he both envied Atlas's courage to fight for love, but also lacked Atlas's ability to break off ties with his family for love. Atlas was much crazier than Waylon. The woman Atlas was going to marry was a third-tier actress, constantly surrounded by scandals since her debut. Atlas's family couldn't accept someone from the entertainment industry as the future wife of their heir. So Atlas had decided to leave the family and stand on his own, rather than compromise. Compared to Waylon, who wanted everything, I honestly admired this pure-hearted warrior. The night I moved out, Waylon unexpectedly called me. "You left some things behind. I'm worried Evelyn might see them and get upset." "I'll bring them over. Where are you staying now?" He still had that condescending tone. I didn't stop folding my clothes, holding the phone with my shoulder and replying indifferently. "Throw them away. They're all things I don't need." There was silence on the other end for a few seconds, only the sound of heavy breathing. After a moment, Waylon sounded frustrated. "What's your problem?" "The engagement is just postponed. Once Evelyn is more stable." I couldn't listen anymore and interrupted him. "Sorry, Mr. Waylon, I'm busy right now." I hung up the phone and immediately blocked his number. I walked to the balcony, feeling the night breeze, gazing at the dazzling lights. Leaving Waylon turned out to be easier than I imagined. The sounds of moaning from downstairs broke the brief silence. I instinctively leaned over to look. Downstairs, the balcony was filled with plants. But I saw a pair of pale hands gripping the railing and a swaying head. Well, it was Atlas and that third-tier actress downstairs. Looks like they knew how to have fun. I wasn't meaning to spy, so I went back to the living room to continue packing my things. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. I opened it, and when I saw who was standing outside, my brain froze for a few seconds. Atlas was here. Then who was downstairs? Atlas's eyes flickered with a hint of surprise. "Sorry, wrong door." After apologizing, he turned to leave. "I just moved in today. Want to come in for a drink?" I called out to him. How should I put it? I felt a bit sorry for him, since we were both betrayed by our partners. Atlas turned back, raising an eyebrow. "Oh? You're not trying to avoid suspicion anymore?" Waylon hated Atlas, and naturally, he wouldn't want me to associate with him. Even though Atlas was a major shareholder in my chain of flower shops, we rarely saw each other. Only during year-end profit sharing would we have brief interactions. Come to think of it, I could reconnect with Atlas and get investment from him. Because of Waylon's family connections. Now that the flower shop was doing well, I had the courage to leave Waylon. Looking back, those 7 years with him weren't entirely wasted. I shrugged. We broke up. Again? Atlas's lips curled into a smirk of schadenfreude. He leaned on the sofa, his long legs sprawled across the coffee table. His casual demeanor, completely different from the cold, aristocratic young master I'd first met. I picked a bottle of fine red wine from the cabinet. This time it's a broken engagement. I handed Atlas the wine glass, my expression indifferent. He swirled the wine in his glass, unable to hide his amusement. "Wow, such expensive wine. Looks like you're really hurt this time. Want me to drink with you and help you forget your troubles?" If he hadn't knocked on the wrong door, he'd probably be hurt even worse. I nodded. "It's very expensive. You gave it to me last year at the annual party after you got drunk. It was a collector's edition wine. At the time, I couldn't take it back to Waylon's villa, so I left it in the apartment's wine cabinet. Now, it had returned to its rightful owner." Atlas's pupils flickered, and then he took a deep gulp of the wine. "Fine, let's celebrate you escaping from hell." I lifted my glass and said, "I also wish you find true love soon." Being betrayed by a partner is something no man wants to hear from anyone, especially from someone they're not close to. Unfortunately, despite my subtle hint, Atlas didn't pick up on it. He smiled, his beautiful peach blossom eyes seeming to charm everyone, yet he was as clueless as a blind man. "My true love is right here," he said. "This is something you should say to yourself." But when I thought about it carefully, I realized I wasn't any better, just as blind. Atlas had broken ties with his family for that actress. And Waylon had shattered my heart into 1,000 pieces. Wine has a way of dulling sorrow, and red wine especially has quite a strong after-effect. Before I knew it, I was drunk out of my mind. I clung to Atlas, laughing and crying, cursing Waylon and then cursing myself. Atlas pushed me away, his tone teasing. "Do you think he doesn't know you're holding another man? Even if you begged him in tears, he wouldn't take you back." It reminded me of the 7 years of me always begging for reconciliation. I vented my grievances from those years, fueled by the alcohol. This time, I don't want him. Even if he begged on his knees, I wouldn't look back. Really? Atlas asked, his gaze intense. I lay drunkenly on the sofa, not seeing the stars sparkling in his eyes. I just muttered back, I never lie. Half dreaming, half awake, I felt a warm pressure on my lips. The sensation spread across my body in waves, leaving me shivering. Instinctively, I responded to the fiery passion. By the time I came to my senses, it was already noon the next day. My whole body ached, as though I had been run over. Looking at the scattered clothes on the floor, I saw Atlas beside me, lying bare-skinned. His long lashes rested on his cheeks, and he was deep in sleep. On his chiseled chest were traces of lingering kisses. Bits and pieces of last night started to come back to me. My brain exploded in realization. Had I really slept with Atlas last night? No matter what his girlfriend did yesterday, they were still together. What did that make me? What if rumors spread that I had broken up their relationship? One word from anyone, and I'd be drowned in their spit. I held my breath, carefully removing Atlas's arm from my waist. I crept around like a thief, put on my clothes, grabbed my phone, and rushed out of the apartment. I sped all the way to the office, finally letting out a long sigh once I was there. I hoped Atlas would wake up and, like me, forget the absurdity of last night. Mr. Whalen is waiting for you in the office. He just had a huge outburst. The secretary looked nervous, probably because Whalen had yelled at her too. I entered the office, where Whalen was leaning against my desk, arms crossed, with my suitcase beside him. When he saw me, he scowled. You actually blocked my number. These are your things. Once Evelyn's condition improves, you can move back. I gave a self-deprecating laugh and replied. We've called off the engagement, what's the point of keeping each other's numbers? Please, Mr. Whalen, block me too. Whalen's eyes faltered for a moment, then he became impatient. I've told you before, don't even think about comparing yourself to Evelyn. In my heart, she'll always be number one. If you want to keep the position of my wife, you'd better know your place. I couldn't help but interrupt him. Mr. Whalen, did I not make myself clear? We've called off the engagement. Who's number one in your heart has nothing to do with me. Got it? I emphasized the last sentence, each word sharp. He froze for a second, his gaze locking with mine, cold and indifferent. It was the first time I saw Whalen so angry and embarrassed in front of me. His veins popped on his neck as he pointed at me and shouted. If you want to play hard to get, I don't have the time for your games. I'm giving you one last chance. Either cooperate with Evelyn's treatment and we'll get engaged once she's better. Or you'll never see me again in this lifetime. I coldly bent down and picked up the papers he had thrown on the floor. As long as Mr. Whalen never comes here to lose his mind again, I promise we'll never meet again in this lifetime. He was so used to me pampering him that he couldn't handle this level of disdain and neglect. Whalen slammed the door on his way out, grinding his teeth as he spat out. Don't come crawling back to me like a dog, begging for reconciliation. I'm tired of seeing you like that. My heart ached like it was being pierced by needles. Even though I didn't love him anymore, after 7 years of investing in this relationship, the feeling of having my heart trampled was unbearable. I didn't have much time to wallow in self-pity. Atlas's calls and messages bombarded me. Bitch, sleep with me and run off. Is this how you treat your investors? Didn't you enjoy last night? I'm giving you 3 minutes. If you don't answer, I'm coming to your company. Looking at Atlas's messages, my heart raced uncontrollably. I was both frightened and confused, so in a panic, I turned off my phone. Although last night wasn't entirely my fault. I didn't exactly refuse either. Atlas was someone who didn't care about anything. I was different. My career was just beginning, and I had too much to consider. I couldn't afford to provoke him, so I had to hide. I booked the fastest flight to Paris. The visa I had gotten was originally for a honeymoon with Whalen. Now, it was being used to escape from the emotional mess I had created. I hid in Paris for over a month. All I did was eat, shop, and go to flower shops, while frantically searching for news about Atlas and Leah. I was terrified of seeing news about them breaking up. No matter the reason, it would be bad for me. Until a reporter leaked a story that Leah and Atlas had been shopping for jewelry together, with rumors hinting that their wedding was near. The photos were taken from a hidden angle, but it was clear that they were picking out engagement rings. A weight lifted off my chest, and I booked a flight back home. Lately, I had lost my appetite and felt exhausted. The day after I returned, I went to the hospital. After some tests, the doctor's words were like a thunderclap. "You're 4 weeks pregnant. Do you want to keep the baby?" Everything spun around me, and I felt the world go silent. Holding the pregnancy test form, I couldn't even remember when I left the clinic. Every step I took felt like walking on cotton. I clearly remembered taking the morning after pill the day I arrived in Paris. "Hazel?" A familiar voice called out to me. I turned and saw Waylon and Evelyn holding hands, looking all affectionate. Evelyn approached me with warmth. "Are you feeling unwell? Why are you here alone?" I told Waylon I could come alone, but he insisted on accompanying me. Evelyn had always been like that. Her gentle tone used to make me lose control of my emotions. But now, I didn't love Waylon anymore, so I wasn't moved and just found her annoying. "You're too weak to even take care of yourself. I bet Waylon still has to help you with everything at home." That one sentence ended the conversation, and Evelyn's eyes reddened. Her gaze locked onto the pregnancy test form in my hand. "You're pregnant?" Tears started to roll down her pale face. Waylon, who had been standing in the background, stepped in front of Evelyn. His brows furrowed, his expression cold. "Get rid of it. Don't make things difficult for yourself." I shot him a cold glance. "It's not yours." Waylon's face darkened, and anger surged in his eyes. I wasn't interested in dealing with his emotions. I walked around them and left. In the hospital parking lot, Waylon caught up with me and grabbed my wrist. I was worried it would affect Evelyn's mood earlier. "Keep the baby, and I'll forget everything that happened before." His voice was so condescending, as if he was doing me a favor. "Mr. Waylon, are you really that thick-headed? The baby is not yours." I yanked my wrist free from his grip and didn't waste any more words on him. "Not mine? Could it be that you have another man?" Waylon's smile was subtle, his tone full of disdain. He wouldn't believe that I could be carrying another man's child. For all these years, I've tolerated and endured with no boundaries in love. That tolerance has been the source of Waylon's confidence and superiority. And today, I shattered it myself, and for some reason, there's a strange sense of revenge that feels almost satisfying. "You're 4 weeks pregnant. Do the math, could this child be mine?" I gave him a cold smile, holding out the pregnancy test results. The moment Waylon saw the test, his smile froze on his face. He grabbed the paper and looked at it again and again, his face twisting with anger. He tore the test results to shreds. Shouting angrily, he demanded, "Whose child is it? How dare you hide this from me and go find another man? When did this happen? How long have you been seeing him?" The sudden betrayal threw Waylon off balance. He yelled at me in the parking lot, furious. After all, in his eyes, I was just the loyal, devoted puppy that couldn't be shaken off. Even though my night with Atlas happened after we had broken off our engagement. To him, it felt like the ultimate betrayal, a metaphorical green hat. I replied softly. "Not long, but enough to outweigh the 7 years I spent with you. I'm only now realizing what it feels like to be loved. To feel genuinely happy." Having loved, I now knew how to wound him deeply. The last sentence I said lightly, with an air of ease. But Waylon's face turned pale in an instant. I had never seen him so stunned before. He just stood there in a daze. Even after I drove off, he didn't snap out of it. Looking at Waylon's forlorn figure in the rearview mirror. I didn't feel excited anymore, nor did I feel sad. I only felt like there was a void opening up inside me. 7 years of love had come to a complete end. The feeling was hard to describe. I had barely turned a corner when my car was forced to stop by a sports car. Atlas got out and walked over briskly. He bent down and opened the driver's side door. His tall figure exuded a strong sense of dominance. With a cold face, he spoke in a low voice, "It's not his. Then is it mine? Are we playing the scene of you leaving heartbroken with a child? You sure know how to play the field, Hazel." Atlas knew? I suppressed my guilt and turned the tables. Are you following me? How else would he know about my conversation with Waylon? I followed you in Paris for a month. You only just noticed? What? How did you know I went to Paris? Atlas sighed, explaining patiently. You had your secretary book the flight and hotel. As a company shareholder, isn't it easy for me to know the CEO's itinerary? Then, his tone softened. I'm a little worried about the IQ of our child. I met his intense gaze, and my heart skipped a beat. This kind of magnetic atmosphere, Waylon and I never had anything like this in 7 years. A car behind us honked loudly, covering up my flustered confusion. The lights green. The driver behind yelled at us. My ears turned red, and my heartbeat quickened. Can you move the car? Let's talk when we get home, all right? Atlas deliberately misinterpreted my words. Fine, then we'll talk at home. He emphasized the word home in the most suggestive tone. I found myself subconsciously avoiding his direct gaze. Before I realized it, he planted a soft kiss on my cheek. By the time I recovered, he was already back in the driver's seat. His playful actions had me in a daze. And I ended up following him back to his apartment without realizing it. But now that the situation was out there, running away wouldn't help. Atlas and I needed to have a serious talk. Once we got home, I said directly. This child was an accident. I'll go to the hospital tomorrow to make an appointment. But before I could finish, I was pulled into his arms from behind. His hot breath brushed against my ear. My body stiffened, and the words I hadn't finished saying were swallowed up. How could you be so heartless? You've been avoiding me for over a month, and now you want to abandon our child? I pushed against his chest to break free, keeping just enough distance between us so I could speak normally. You're willing to sever ties with your family for Leah. Honestly, I've been moved by your love for her. So, I can't stand the thought of ruining your relationship. This child is mine, and I have the right to decide whether they stay or go. Please, forget about that night, and just marry her in peace. Atlas grinned wickedly, pushing my hand to my stomach. Your abs are looking good. You can touch them here. Even through the fabric, I could feel his warmth and the firm muscles beneath. My ears turned bright red, and I tried to pull my hand away, but he held it tightly. Who told you that I'm marrying Leah? Aren't you two going to pick out? I'm not playing this game with Leah. Would I have come back from Paris otherwise? I was even more confused now. Why would Leah help you play this game and trick me into coming back? Did he find out Leah betrayed him? Had they broken up? Why wouldn't she want to? My relationship with Leah has always been pure friendship from the start. Atlas dialed Leah's number in front of me. Leah's voice came through the receiver, laced with soft panting and seductive tones. I couldn't even begin to imagine what she was doing right now. Strangely, my mind flashed back to that night when I accidentally overheard a scene. Did you win your wife back? You have no idea how much that news has affected my dates with the boys. Atlas's voice was lazy. Victory is within reach. Say hi to her. Before I knew it, the phone was shoved toward my mouth. I awkwardly said hi to Leah. If you're free, come have a drink. I'll introduce you to some good-looking guys. I answered in a daze. The phone was immediately hung up by Atlas. You're touching my abs and thinking about other men? I jerked my hand back like I'd been electrocuted, my heart pounding uncontrollably. I avoided Atlas's smoldering gaze and sat on the couch. What's going on? I tried to keep my voice steady. In my memory, I hadn't interacted much with Atlas. We had never dated, and there had never been any ambiguity between us. So where did this idea of chasing me come from? He pulled up a chair and sat across from me. His intense gaze was fixed on my face. You married me 18 years ago. Then you abandoned me and got with Waylon. Now, aren't I just pursuing you? 18 years ago? Such a distant memory. Back then, I was still the little princess, pampered by my parents. Atlas was very mature for his age, not the carefree person he was now. And Waylon never looked down on me from such a high pedestal. As for what Atlas referred to as marrying him, it was just me playing house when I was 8 years old. After having a fight with Waylon, I made Atlas my groom out of spite. It was also the same year my father went bankrupt and we had to move out of the villa. After that, I lost contact with both Waylon and Atlas. 7 years ago, I came back into their lives. It was to raise money for my seriously ill father's surgery. I wore a faded dress, swallowing my pride to ask for help from Waylon's family. Waylon and I were engaged. A marriage arranged by our grandfathers long ago. I didn't expect Waylon's family to acknowledge the engagement. I just hoped they would lend a helping hand, considering the past connections. After all, both our grandfathers had passed away. And the engagement was just a verbal agreement. I never imagined Waylon's family would help, and then accept the engagement. Waylon and I naturally started dating. It wasn't until the third year of university that things changed. Waylon, who always contacted me promptly every Saturday, suddenly stopped responding. That's when I learned that Waylon's family had an adopted daughter named Evelyn. She was the orphan left behind by Waylon's father's first love. Despite his wife's objections, Waylon's father insisted on adopting her. As his wife put it, Evelyn, like her mother, was a manipulative, weak, seductive type of woman. The next 7 years proved that what she said wasn't far from the truth. Evelyn was adopted by Waylon's family when she was 15. It was right around the age when a girl's first love begins to blossom. At that time, Waylon wasn't interested in romance. He only saw her as a sister and treated her with care. But his wife quickly noticed that Evelyn's feelings for Waylon were not as innocent. So, before Evelyn could finish high school, she was sent abroad. From then on, Evelyn would often contact Waylon for video calls or phone chats, claiming she was lonely and scared living abroad. But when I came into the picture, Evelyn noticed that Waylon had become distant. Waylon eventually told Evelyn about our relationship. That's when Evelyn began her act of being frail and helpless. She would say she was being followed by strange men or bullied by other girls. She used all sorts of reasons to try to grab Waylon's attention. And then, in the third year of university, Evelyn tried to win him back but failed. She ended up taking her own life. Waylon, unable to inform me in time, immediately bought a plane ticket and rushed to her side. I can only imagine that when Waylon saw Evelyn lying weakly on that hospital bed, recounting her unspoken love for him, he must have been shocked and moved. After he returned, I could feel that his heart was torn between Evelyn and me. I thought I was helpless. Without Evelyn's cunning and schemes, I had no chance. Ultimately, Waylon's emotions tilted in her favor. Perhaps the entangled triangle between Waylon and Evelyn had drained him emotionally, but I never noticed Atlas's intense feelings for me. I missed the red-rimmed eyes when we reunited after 18 years. I didn't even realize, as Waylon and I walked side by side on campus, that Atlas was watching from the distance, looking lonely. I didn't know that during the times Waylon hurt me, Atlas had already made up his mind to win me back. Atlas wanted to marry me. Our engagement was a hurdle for him. So, 4 years ago, he and the carefree Leah hit it off immediately. He invested in her and protected her, making sure she didn't have to deal with the harassment of older rich men and could date as many handsome guys as she wanted. Leah's antics helped lower the bar for entering Atlas's family. Atlas explained that marrying into his family was like putting out a fire on a roof, while marrying into Waylon's family was like opening a skylight on the roof. Given this, his mother would definitely smile and bless me and Atlas. That was his plan for 4 years. Of course, him starting his own business was an unexpected bonus. Even if I didn't marry into his family, his wealth could provide for me for a lifetime. At that moment, I thought I finally understood Waylon's feelings. Because, after all these years, he had liked me since that childhood game of house when we were kids. Was it possible he had liked me all this time? I couldn't believe it, but I was deeply shocked. We were only 8 years old back then. Aren't you a little too mature for your age? He corrected me seriously. You were 8, I was 10. I pulled my hand out of his grasp. How are you so sure I'll break up with Waylon? And how do you know that if I do, I'll be with you? A playful smile tugged at his lips. Of course, I'm confident. After all, I've done so much to make sure you're happy. He emphasized the words happy and purposely stood up to display his abs and chest like a peacock showing off its feathers. I couldn't help but feel flushed and my mind went into a chaotic blur. Uncontrollably, I thought back to that night. Go back first, let me be alone for a while. I pulled open the door, signaling for him to leave. The shock of today's events was too much for me to handle all at once. Atlas froze with his hand still lifted as if to lift his shirt. His dark, deep eyes were full of a wounded look that unexpectedly tugged at my heartstrings. If you won't let me stay, it must be because my abs aren't good enough. I'll go back and keep working on my fitness. He turned to leave but paused, his smile fading into a serious expression. His gaze fell on my stomach. He opened his mouth to speak, but I interrupted him. Give me 3 days to think about it. Don't contact me during these 3 days. Atlas was a man of his word. For the next 3 days, he didn't contact me. But I couldn't escape his presence. He showed off his body on Instagram, posted pictures of his abs, and walked by me in a suit pushing a shopping cart, as if by coincidence. I finally understood the meaning behind his perfect 3-point shots at the basketball court during college. So this is what it feels like to be loved in such an active and vibrant way. I even started thinking that Atlas would make a fun, great dad. On the 3rd day, I went to the hospital. The moment I heard the baby's heartbeat, I found my answer. Carrying bags of supplements, I was heading back to my apartment when I saw Evelyn from a distance. Her hair was disheveled, and she was still wearing slippers. She looked dazed as she flagged me down and defiantly shouted. "Where's Waylon? Where have you hidden him?" I rolled down the car window and coldly retorted. Why would I hide trash like him? Evelyn froze, then pointed at me and started yelling. Ever since I ran into you at the hospital, Waylon has been unreachable. He's never treated me like this. You're so shameless, using a child to trap Waylon, and then pretending to be so noble? Do you really think Waylon loves you? To him, you're just a machine for having babies. Evelyn's hysterical behavior was nothing like her previous sweet, innocent persona. I couldn't help but feel a little amused. Is this what fate is? For the past 7 years, whenever Evelyn returned to the country, Waylon would disappear for a while. Every time I went to confront her, she would laugh and mock me. Going to your rival's hotel to find your boyfriend? You're truly adaptable. I could imagine how proud she had been back then, and now, how humiliated she was. Evelyn had many tricks to make Waylon show up. Cutting her wrists, pretending to jump off buildings, and now, even using her depression as an excuse. It seemed she had exhausted all her methods, but with Waylon still nowhere to be found, her emotions finally snapped. I quietly watched her lose control from the car. When she finally calmed down a little, I spoke calmly. Waylon's not here, and the baby isn't his. I'm not like you, I don't interfere in other people's relationships, and I don't have a habit of picking up trash. Evelyn froze, her face pale. She mumbled, No. No. Waylon loves me. You must have lied to him, claiming that the child was his, and that's why he left me. I didn't respond and started the car, leaving her standing there. I wasn't disturbed by her appearance. Back at the apartment, I eagerly looked up videos on prenatal education. My dull life suddenly felt more vibrant with the anticipation of the future. That night, I had a bizarre but beautiful dream. I was holding our baby and having a wedding with Atlas. After the wedding, we lived happily as a couple, and our child was well-behaved and understanding. But the dream abruptly ended with a rhythmic knock on the door. Half awake, I opened the door. It was Atlas, leaning against the doorframe. He was bare-chested, the bath towel strategically draped to highlight his abs. In my dream, Atlas was also very enthusiastic about showing off his abs. He even performed tricks like cracking walnuts with his abs and opening a bottle of wine. I groggily murmured, Baby, you're back. What did you just call me? Atlas's sudden raised voice startled me awake. As I regained my senses and met his burning gaze, my ears burned and my heart raced. The whole night, I came up with countless lame excuses to explain why I had accidentally called him baby. He still clung to me like a koala, not letting go. I compromised, if he was willing to perform his abs bottle opening trick. I'd admit that I did indeed call him baby earlier. After that, it became impossible to find any beer bottles with caps in the apartment. The dynamics between people are truly strange. I've been with Waylon for 7 years, yet there's still an unspoken distance between us. But after only 7 days with Atlas, the comfort between us felt as though we had been living together for years. I wasn't afraid to appear in front of him in any outfit. And I didn't have to think about which jokes might go too far. As I approached 30, I finally felt the sweetness of being in love. The morning Waylon came to the apartment, Atlas and I were about to go apply for a marriage license. After more than 10 days without seeing him, Waylon had lost weight, his suit hanging loose, and his eye sockets sunken. His once neat hair was now disheveled, falling messily across his forehead. With reddened eyes, he hoarsely spoke, "I lost. I think I love you even more than I imagined. These days, I've been unable to sleep at night. When I close my eyes, all I see is you. So, whether it's Evelyn or that man, let's forget about them. Come back to me, and let's start over." The deep affection in Waylon's eyes seemed like it could overflow. He raised his hand as if to touch my face, but I stepped back to avoid it. I was a bit dazed. Had I not been clear that day, or had Waylon lost his memory? He knew I was carrying someone else's child and still came here to make peace? I remember clearly telling Mr. Waylon that the child I'm carrying isn't yours. Upon hearing this, Waylon's breath grew heavy, and his fists clenched. His tone was restrained, "If it's not mine, I'll accept it." I almost thought I had misheard. Prideful as Waylon was, he was actually willing to accept another man's child. "I'm serious. If you want to keep this child, I'll treat him as my own. If you don't, I'll accompany you to the hospital." Before he could finish, he was interrupted. "Mr. Waylon, you always want to claim the same person, wife and child." Atlas, wrapped in a bath towel, leisurely walked over from the bathroom. As though declaring his territory, Atlas pulled me into his embrace. "Atlas? It's you." Waylon's face showed surprise, his brows furrowing. Atlas nodded, a proud smile curling at his lips. "Yes, it's me." Waylon stood there, stunned for a full 10 seconds, his gaze complex. After a moment, he composed himself and looked at Atlas with a provocative expression. "She loved me for 7 years, no, more than 7 years. She's always liked me since she was a child. You just took advantage of an opportunity. Without this child, she would never leave me. Even if she chose you out of spite today, she won't really love you. Atlas, even if you marry Hazel, you'll always be my defeated opponent." He had always relied on my love for him, tolerating Evelyn's mistreatment of me. Now, he was using my past feelings to provoke Atlas. If this thorn took root in Atlas's heart, one day, Atlas and I would inevitably grow apart. "Mr. Waylon." Atlas loosened his hold around my waist. The next moment, Atlas's large hand rested on my lower abdomen. This is what they call a father's power. It's an honor, a medal. Without him, there would be no Atlas today. Atlas's smile grew more self-satisfied. The more he smiled triumphantly, the darker Waylon's expression became. His angry gaze flickered back and forth between me and Atlas. "Don't regret it, Hazel." Waylon forced himself to stay calm and turned to leave. "Wait," I called out to Waylon. He turned back, eyes full of hope. I took a step forward to follow him, but Atlas tightly gripped my hand. His eyes were filled with grievance, looking at me pitifully. I smiled and gently patted his hand to reassure him, "I need to talk to him." Reluctantly, he let go and returned to the room. Standing in front of Waylon, I extended my hand. "I bought the ring, so give it back to me." Waylon was still wearing the engagement ring I had chosen for him. I no longer wanted anything to do with him and certainly didn't want to keep a memento that would remind me of him. Waylon's gaze slowly dimmed. His eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and lingering hope. "I don't believe you've really fallen for him. Can you really fall in love with someone so easily?" I lowered my gaze and murmured, repeating softly. "I didn't expect it to be so easy to fall in love either. Being with Atlas these days has made me genuinely happy. I haven't thought about you once, Waylon." I lifted my head, meeting his gaze firmly. "I really don't love you anymore. I really do love Atlas. Your family has done me a great favor, Waylon, and I don't want things to get ugly. Let's part on good terms." Waylon's eyes reddened in an instant. He stared at the silver ring for a long time, his smile bitter. "Looks like I really lost you." Slowly, Waylon took off the ring and placed it in my palm, still warm from his touch. His voice was filled with longing, if the engagement hadn't been called off. I interrupted him, "There are no ifs. Everything happens for the best. After saying that, I turned and walked straight back to the room, leaving Waylon with my resolute back. When I returned to the room, I saw Atlas with a grin he couldn't hide. I heard everything you two said. So, you chose to marry me, not because I'm the father of your child? I didn't want to hide anything anymore, so I stood on tiptoe and wrapped my arms around his neck. No. And the reason I called you baby that night was because I dreamed we got married. So, my baby, when are we having our wedding? I don't want it to be like in the dream, marrying with a child in my arms. Finally, I saw the galaxy of stars flickering in Atlas's eyes. He was so moved, he couldn't speak, leaning down to kiss me again and again. His love blossomed freely between his lips. We'll have the wedding this month. His gaze was dazed as he whispered, his words full of joy. The day Atlas and I went to his family with our marriage certificate, Leah had announced her romance with a young man, mentioning Atlas and thanking him for his protection and the smooth collaboration, also congratulating him for finally winning over the woman of his dreams. His mother looked at the news with mixed feelings. Angry that he had caused such a stir with a female celebrity, but happy that he wasn't actually marrying her. His father looked sternly at Atlas, scolding him that if he had focused on the company, he could have retired by now and traveled the world with his wife. As expected, Atlas's parents were very pleased with me. Once they learned about the child, they immediately began planning a retirement trip to take their grandchild around the world. Atlas and I had a smooth wedding. There was only one small incident. Evelyn climbed to the rooftop of the building across from the hotel to force Waylon into marriage. Unfortunately, after the wedding, Waylon still didn't show up. Evelyn stood there, her legs weak, but fearing for her life, she left on her own. On our wedding night, Atlas looked troubled as he practiced his abs in the gym. I asked him, "Why aren't you smiling?" He said, "I'm waiting to laugh really hard after the baby is born." End of the story.